liberty. Open your eyes and you will see that America is still the land of the free.
Welcome to the Voice of Freedom, your national beacon of liberty. Now, here's your Voice of Freedom, Brent Johnson.
Peter Joseph has created quite a stir, not just in the United States, but all over the world, with the release of his first film, Zeitgeist, and then he followed that with Zeitgeist Addendum. He's the founder of the Zeitgeist movement, which seeks to install a global resource-based economy and remove the monetary paradigm current social model, and I think we all know exactly why. Dr. Peter Joseph, thank you for joining us. We are honored. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, David. It's good to be back. It's good to hear your voice, and I'm happy to be on.
I'm glad to have you. Okay, now, for all those folks out there that always ask, what the heck does Zeitgeist mean? Would you explain the definition, or your definition, of Zeitgeist?
Sure. There's a few working definitions out there. I simply use it to represent the collective awareness of a culture, that aspect of human society, those values that we all seem to share at a specific point in time. And the question is, are those values and are those systems, are those structures that we have in place actually viable? And that's, of course, a difficult cultural question. So the zeitgeist are those shared values that we think might be true, but maybe they're not. Maybe we should start thinking about other alternatives to certain things that are going on. But the technical definition is spirit of the age, which is a gestural notion, but I use it in a more intellectual sense as far as shared values.
Okay, very good. That's sort of exactly what I believe the definition was, but a lot of folks ask, and, the best thing I could do is say it is the spirit of the age, and I think the spirit of the age that we've been living in for the past, almost 2,000 years, or over 2,000 years, has been deception. Well, let me move right into it. Your first film, Zeitgeist, came out in, what was it, 2005 that you released that?
Actually, no, it was 2007.
Oh, really? Okay,
yep.
Boy, time goes by quickly, I guess.
It does. I believe it was July of 2007, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Well, in that time, the Zeitgeist film immediately went global. Because, I remember in 2008, I was in in Australia. And they had already established an international Zeitgeist Day. And all over the globe, they were showing copies of your film. Did you have any idea whatsoever that when you released this film that this would go global as quickly as it did? And what has been the ramification?
Well, no. I had no intention of such an awareness being sparked when I first created that project. It was quite fascinating, and it blew my mind. I think ultimately what it came down to is it wasn't as much the film itself, but what people saw in the film and what it meant to them, and this overarching need, I think, across the world these days, that we have to start thinking about some new alternatives to our current social structures, both ideological and physical. So, Zeitgeist Day materialized right after it came out, the March, after the release. And I did it as an experiment, to be perfectly frank. I was like, well, let's see what people are willing to do to push forward some of this information. And it sparked, in fact, a global phenomenon which carries over into this coming year. As we could talk about later in the show, we have Zeitgeist Day again coming up in mid-March, March 13th. And this is a much more focused event, based around the Zeitgeist movement. And it's fascinating. It's truly wonderful to see all the cultures of the world slowly start to come together with a common viewpoint. And that's really the whole point.
Well, I think that we're all starting to see, and also, more importantly, feel that the direction that the entire Western world has taken, basically being motivated by a profit rather than progress or people or peace. We can all see where it's taken this world. The world is on the brink of global war, of absolute financial collapse. And mankind and civilization seems to have just taken a wrong turn and is just now starting to realize it. Now, I realize that you've also faced a lot of opposition, especially with the first segment of the first film that you put out there, which basically went after religion. Now, it did not go after God. I think that you're a very spiritual person, and our conversations that we've had in the past, I think I know where you're coming from. But unfortunately, some people just seem to miss the point. And when they started making copies and distributing them, they started taking out the first segment. Let me ask you, how did that make you feel? Do you feel that people missed the point, or do you think that they were just misguided, or do you think that this is an active campaign to discredit and somehow take away from the thrust of your project?
Well, it's a complex point, and the emotional ramifications that we all have when it comes to our sense of identity. You know, when you're brought up in a particular belief system, whether the belief system is true or not, tends to go to the wayside when it becomes threatened because of our emotional attachments to it. You know, and this goes for just about anything. This could be said for our social structures. I think there has been a great amount of misinterpretation of that opening section of the film. My intent was never to insult people or to even insult any particular religion or anything like that. It was simply to give a viewpoint that was very little discussed about the origins of religion, and there, in part, some political ramifications of religion and how it's been used for the political establishment in malicious ways. I have, as you mentioned, and I really always appreciated the way you correctly interpreted that work, David, because you know, a lot of people out there in the religious community, they tend to take extreme odds and do not seem to understand what the point of that section was. People's religion should be, it should be their own religion in the sense that they should be novel enough in their interpretation of whatever sacred text that they're referring to accept it on their own accord and not be thrown into disarray just because someone else has a different perspective. So I guess in the end, you know, even though there's been a lot of, you know, I get lots of negative feedback still, it's slowly coming forward, I think, and as I produce new films and I clarify my position, it's slowly coming forward what the point of that section actually was. And I'm not as much worried about it anymore. I think I've made a lot of great friends across all religions because of the movement, and they understand what that section was actually about. And it wasn't an insolent section. It was there to shake things up a little bit and say, you know what, there might be some things that tradition has told you that do not link back and do not have a logical train of thought to actually denote certain historicities or certain historical elements that have been accepted through time, but the more you put a magnifying glass underneath it, just like anything in our history, you tend to find different answers and different sources. So,
Dr. Joseph, Brent Johnson here. When I saw that first part, I have to tell you that I'm dedicated to truth. That is my guiding light, my North Star. And so wherever I see truth, I'm willing to see it, even if it's upsetting my lifestyle or turning my perceptions upside down. When I saw that part, it definitely affected me in that, you know, as you're saying, it was hitting upon a very personal, intimate subject around religion, God, and such. But I found it personally eye-opening and fascinating. And coming away saying, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm very, very glad to have been exposed to that first section. And I will go back and look at it again and again because I think it's brilliant and brilliantly portrayed.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And, you know, once again, I think everyone, even if they feel challenged, that we should be open to new information. I am always open to people challenging anything I talk about. In fact, my favorite disposition is to be challenged. So I think we should all have the integrity of what we believe in to be able to accept others to disagree with us, of course, and to really look into new information about belief systems that have been around and have a strong traditional presence. It's just one of those things that happens with people. They tend to reject new information because their identity becomes so ingrained and indoctrinated, and this, of course, goes for the political sphere probably more than anything else. But anyway, I appreciate that comment.
Yeah, I wanted to point out that it seems that more and more people are becoming aware of the cancer of corporatism. In other words, as we mentioned before, the idea that profit is more important than any other thing. And the idea of moving into a world that has no money, that is sort of alluded to in the Venus Project's section of the second film, Zeitgeist Addendum. I was wondering if you might clarify a little bit more for the listeners out there that don't quite get where you're going with this and where this concept of Venus Project is. How can we possibly think of a world that has no money? How could that possibly work?
Right. Well, I think I have to state that I think it's an inevitability. First of all, I'd like to point out that what's happening in the world today, we've become absolutely decoupled from the natural world, meaning our distribution and production processes do not have a frame of reference going back to the materials of the planet. All you have to do is think about our reliance on fossil fuels, from every power station to every automobile to all of our plastics and everything, to see that we are in an unsustainable paradigm. And the problem with the monetary incentive, if you will, the profit incentive, is that it creates a form of paralysis. Once you build a corporation that is based upon financial income, when new information comes along that might, challenge or have new technologies or might make things more sustainable, those things get paralyzed because of, as we know the term cartel today very, very well, our world is essentially run by cartels. These cartels are natural byproducts of our economic structure, our profit-based market system, and they paralyze progress. So I'll get to answer your question in a moment about how it actually can work, but I think the first thing to understand is the source and the reasoning for it. We live on a planet that's a closed system. It's closed in the sense that we're not going to be going to Mars anytime soon, most likely to mine for minerals. So we have to deal with what's actually available on our planet as it exists today. Therefore, intelligent management of earthly resources should be the number one focus and priority of all social systems across this globe. We have to start to realize that as population continues to grow, the demand for more resources and energy will continue to grow. And if we focus on our current social structure, if we focus on the methods that we're using of agriculture, if we focus on basically the overall structure of society and the methods that we're using, it's utterly unsustainable. People don't seem to really understand that what we're doing is going to lead to our self-destruction, and the profit motive simply couples in with that. Let me give you a few more examples for those that aren't really familiar with a lot of what we're talking about. We live in a market system which is based on competition. So the idea is that competition breeds an incentive for progress, and this is half true. If you have two cell phone companies, they are trying to outdo each other, right? So they each try to create improvements, technical improvements that the consumer might want. But what isn't recognized is that each one of those companies knows that they have to have people constantly buying from them in order to survive. As we most should understand, our entire global economy is based on cyclical consumption, meaning that the GDP of all economies is entirely based on the constant duplication and reproduction and maintenance of anything that's sold. This creates an inherent incentive, if you will, to limit quality of production, to limit and to create essentially more waste. For example, if I was to build anything, I'm going to be limited by what I can afford to maintain a competitive edge. So therefore, it is inherently impossible for any corporation out there to make something that is literally, quote, correct, meaning it's based on all available information for sustainable practices, for recycling protocols. It's available to make it the most optimized product ever created. At that point in time, it is impossible for them to do so because they wouldn't be able to have a competitive edge in that context. Therefore, the whole system produces what we call planned obsolescence inherently. This type of duplication is what will destroy the resources of the planet faster than anything else. We have no protocols for recycling. Anyway, I'm not going to harp on that, but let me go back to my original point regarding these two cell phone companies. Imagine the progress that we would have if we focused on producing the best of everything.
We've got great anticipation of your third film. I understand it's scheduled for release in October of this year, which, of course, is a little ways away. What can we expect from the third Zeitgeist film, Zeitgeist 2010?
Well, it's pretty simple, really. The third film, of course, I'm going to maintain a lot of gestural aspects that couple into what I call social therapy. It's very important that we engage. As you're a filmmaker, a brilliant filmmaker yourself, David, and you know the necessity to get under people's skin a little bit in an emotional sense. So what I've done in this film, I've created an actual narrative to go along with the actual documentary, believe it or not. I'm not going to tell you what that is. But the film in its broadest sense is going to be both an intellectual film and an emotional film, which of course is very relevant to trying to get people's values updated a little bit, if you will. But as far as the specifics of the documentary is going to basically take all the ideas that were explored at the second half, during the second half of Zeitgeist Addendum, which talked about these new social ideas, talked about a world that's based in a systems approach, talked about a need to redesign our labor structure and a total economic overhaul. What economic in the sense of a non-monetary overhaul, of course. And what this film is going to do is go point by point to show the audience how feasible and how reasonable the ideas that I'm expressing are. The problem is with most people that see that section, they project into it, the section from Zeitgeist Addendum, they project into it, they say, well, this sounds like Marxism, this sounds like communism. They fail to see the relationship that we're trying to draw from resource management, which is the central point, and everything sort of flourishes from this systems approach to resource management. So the new film is going to have many, many scientists. It's also going to talk about our energy crisis, all the future that might be in store for us with the growing tensions across the world, with the economic collapse, with the lack of recovery, which I don't feel there's going to be a recovery of the U.S. economy. We are not going to be going back to the levels that we saw in 2007, 2008. We're just going to hit a lower plateau, and I believe these plateaus will get lower and lower and lower as we continue to destroy our energy resources and the wars continue to spread. So, pardon my tangent, essentially the new film will go through everything that needs to be expressed to an individual that's curious but doesn't quite understand how it fits in, how the social structure would actually operate. And that's basically it.
Your work is absolutely imperative that people at least open their eyes, open their minds, and consider, because it is a paradigm shift. Now, you have two websites. I want to give them both out. Of course, the coming Z-Day, Zeitgeist Day, is going to be March 13th of this year, and you can go to his website, zday2010.org. That's zday2010.org. And you can also view his films online if you go to zeitgeistmovie.com. Peter Joseph, thank you so much. I promise you will be getting yet another invitation in the near future. I want to talk to you some more and get as many people behind this movement as possible.
Great. Thank you very much, Dave. I really appreciate that, and I'm happy to come back on anytime. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely.